April 29, 1943. The skies over Kuban, Soviet Russia. A single radio broadcast sends panic through every German fighter squadron within 50 miles. The voice cuts through static. Urgent. Desperate. Achtung, Achtung, Pokrishkin ist in der Luft. Junior pilots, boys barely 20 years old, receive immediate orders. Break off combat. Return to base. Do not engage. This is not a suggestion. This is survival. The man they feared was flying an American airplane. An airplane the United States military called inferior and tried to erase from history. Silence holds for 3 seconds. Let that sink in. This is the story of a fighter aircraft that America rejected, yet sent half its entire production overseas. 4,773 airplanes delivered to Soviet allies. A plane British pilots flew exactly one combat mission with before demanding Spitfires instead. And yet, it produced 4 of the top 6 Soviet aces of World War II, achieved kill ratios of 8-to-1 against the Luftwaffe, and prompted Joseph Stalin himself to personally write Franklin Roosevelt requesting more of them. So what really happened to the P-39 Airacobra? The answer involves a bankrupt company, a turbocharger removed while its only champion was conveniently sent overseas, a fascist journalist who poisoned its reputation before Britain ever flew it, and a procurement chief who walked straight from controlling $43 billion in wartime contracts into the aircraft industry's top lobbying job. This is the story they tried to bury. If you served during World War II, or if your father, uncle, or brother worked in aircraft factories during those years, you might remember a time when America's industrial might was the envy of the world. But you might not remember the P-39 Airacobra. At the United States Air Force Academy, 5 principal American fighters from World War II stand on display. The P-38 Lightning, the P-40 Warhawk, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the P-51 Mustang. The P-39 Airacobra is not there. It is the only one of America's 5 principal fighters that has no pilots association, the only one excluded from the memorial. The question is simple. Why, if you have memories of the P-39, or if someone you knew flew one, leave a comment below. Because what we discovered will change how you see American aviation history forever. But first, we need to go back to where it all began. February 1937, Wright Field, Ohio. Lieutenant Benjamin S. Kelsey sits in a cramped office drafting what he believes will revolutionize American air power. Across from him, Captain Gordon P. Seville leans over technical drawings. The typewriter clacks in measured rhythm. Circular Proposal X609. They want something that does not exist yet. A high-altitude interceptor with a turbo supercharger, tricycle landing gear, and a 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub. The most powerful armament of any American fighter. A small company from Buffalo, New York, wins the contract. Bell Aircraft, founded just 2 years earlier with 56 employees. While Lockheed Republic and North American employ tens of thousands, Bell has produced exactly 15 flyable aircraft in total. They are functionally on the brink of bankruptcy, but their prototype is extraordinary. April 6, 1939. The XP-39 prototype first flies from Wright Field. The engine sits behind the pilot, connected to the propeller by a 10-foot drive shaft running between his legs. This frees the nose for that massive 37mm cannon. Bell claims the prototype reaches 390 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. The real number, calculated later by NACA engineers, was closer to 340. But still, the design has potential, real potential. Then General Henry Arnold, commander of the Army Air Corps, makes a decision. He orders the XP-39 sent to NACA's Langley Wind Tunnel for evaluation. And Benjamin Kelsey, the man who wrote the specification requiring a turbocharger, the P-39's only true champion, is ordered to England. He would later call this the biggest regret of his career, because what happened while he was gone would doom the aircraft forever. August 1939, Wright Field, Ohio. A joint meeting between the U.S. Army Air Corps and NACA engineering staff. Benjamin Kelsey is 3,000 miles away in England. The P-39's only advocate absent. Larry Bell himself, the CEO, stands before the committee. He proposes something shocking. Remove the turbocharger from all production aircraft. The NACA engineers concur. Their reasoning seems sound. The turbocharger's installation creates massive drag. The intercooler removes only 25% of heat during high-speed flight, just 12% during climb. The ducting has sharp corners, severe pressure losses. The whole assembly protrudes into the slipstream like a tumor. They promise Larry Bell something extraordinary. Strip the turbocharger, clean up the airframe, and the P-39 will reach 429 miles per hour without the turbo. Bell agrees, not because he believes them, because Bell Aircraft has just secured a desperately needed $2 million advance from France on an $11 million order. The company cannot afford delays for a turbocharger redesign. One historian would later conclude that neither Bell nor his chief designer, Robert Woods, were willing to go to the mat for their beautiful fighter. To preserve the company's financial viability, they would have to take it on the chin. Bell chooses solvency over performance, and the fighter pays the price for the next 80 years. The production P-39D achieved roughly 368 miles per hour at 13,800 feet, not 429. Above 12,000 feet, performance degraded rapidly. Above 20,000 feet, the P-39 was nearly useless. Nassier's promise never materialized. When Kelsey returned from England and learned what had happened, he expressed deep, lifelong regret. But here is what makes this more than just bad engineering. Lockheed solved the exact same problem with the P-38 Lightning. Twin engines, remote turbochargers. The technology existed. The problem was solvable. So why did Bell delete the turbocharger instead of redesigning it? And why was Benjamin Kelsey the one man who could have stopped this conveniently sent to England at the exact moment the decision was made? Was this incompetence or something darker? To understand what happened next, you need to know about three men who controlled American fighter procurement during World War II. Major General Oliver P. Eccles, chief of the Materiel Division at Wright Field, the single most powerful figure in U.S. Army Air Force procurement. Every major fighter acquisition flowed through his desk. $43.5 billion in wartime contracts. His pattern of behavior raises serious questions. When North American Aviation delivered P-51 Mustang test aircraft to Wright Field, Eccles refused to fly them. A visiting test pilot asked why the P-51 had never been evaluated. Eccles replied, "Why would we waste effort flying it when there is no plan to purchase any?" He championed the Fisher P-75, an aircraft that never entered service. He tried to force North American to build licensed P-40s instead of developing new fighters. He held a personal grudge against Howard Hughes, blocking him from contracts for years. And here is where it gets interesting. After retiring in December 1946, Oliver Eccles became president of the Aircraft Industries Association, the main lobbying organization for every major aircraft manufacturer. Lockheed, North American, Boeing, Douglas, Republic. The man who controlled $43 billion in wartime procurement walked directly into the industry's top lobbying position. No cooling off period, no ethics review, completely legal in 1946. General Henry Arnold, Commander U.S. Army Air Forces, personal friends with James Dutch Kindleberger, President of North American Aviation. They had served together in World War I. Arnold's only direct intervention in fighter procurement override Eccles and forced purchase the P-51 Mustang, directly benefiting his friend's company. No such intervention was ever made for the P-39. Benjamin Kelsey, the P-39's nominal champion. But Kelsey had written the specification for another fighter, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. He personally flew the XP-38 prototype on its record-breaking cross-country flight. He later flew P-38 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe, nearly died testing P-38 dive flaps. His emotional investment in the P-38 dwarfed any connection to the P-39. And then there was Larry Bell, high school dropout, running a tiny company from Buffalo, New York, competing against established manufacturers with deep Pentagon relationships based in politically connected Southern California. Bell Aircraft was a political outsider. The P-39 never had a chance. March 1940. 8 months before any British pilot ever sat in a P-39 cockpit, Charles G. Gray published a devastating anonymous article in the Airplane magazine. "The Bell P-39 is all wrong," he wrote. "The British Purchasing Commission should not be hoodwinked." Gray was one of the most influential aviation journalists in Britain, former editor of Jane's All the World's Aircraft. The Air Ministry, as one historian noted, ran scared of him on many issues. He was also a known fascist sympathizer with pro-German attitudes. He had been fired from the airplane when war broke out. He had previously led a campaign to close the Royal Aircraft Factory during World War I, just as it was about to deliver some very advanced designs. So when production P400s arrived in Britain and performed below Bell's inflated claims 355 miles per hour at 13,000 feet versus the advertised 400 from an unarmed prototype, Gray's predictions appeared vindicated. The Air Ministry panicked. The political embarrassment of having bought an aircraft Gray publicly warned against was acute. Only one Royal Air Force squadron ever operated the P400 in combat, number 601 Squadron. They flew exactly one mission. October 9, 1941, attacking barges near Dunkirk. By March 1942, they had re-equipped with Spitfires. Total British combat sorties in the P-39 8 missions, before declaring it unsuitable. But here is what the RAF's own internal assessments acknowledged. The P-400 was effective for low-level fighter and ground attack work, a role they never seriously explored. There was also a financial motive. Britain had paid cash for P-400s under pre-Lend-Lease contracts. Dumping them freed up money for superior aircraft available free under Lend-Lease. A fascist sympathizer poisoned the well. The Air Ministry feared media attack. Economic convenience sealed the deal. And the P-39 was branded a failure in Western aviation history forever. But those 675 rejected British aircraft were not destroyed. They were sent east, 6,000 miles east, to snow-covered airfields where the airplane America rejected was about to become a legend. 1941 to 1945, the largest secret weapons pipeline of World War II. 4,773 P-39 Airacobras sent to the Soviet Union, nearly half of total production, plus 2,397 P-63 King Cobras and improved P-39, 7,170 aircraft total, the largest export of any American fighter family to any single nation in the entire war. The route was extraordinary. P-39s rolled off the assembly line in Buffalo, New York, flew to Great Falls, Montana, where Soviet red stars were painted on their fuselages. American ferry pilots, many of them women, flew them through Canada to Fairbanks, Alaska. Then Soviet ferry regiments took over. 55 miles of freezing ocean, the Bering Strait, 12 time zones across Siberia, 14,000 kilometers through blizzards and temperatures that froze oil solid. Nancy Harkness Love commanded the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. She personally delivered 39 PS to Great Falls. Young women, 20 years old, 22, 25. 133 aircraft crashed during ferry flights. 38 women Air Force service pilots died delivering these aircraft. Let that weight settle for a moment. By 1944, a P-39 cost $50,166, essentially identical to a P-51 Mustang at $51,572. If the P-39 were truly worthless, shipping nearly 5,000 of them to an ally fighting for survival would have been an act of sabotage, not strategy. But when those aircraft arrived in Russia, something unexpected happened. Alexander Ivanovich Pokrishkin, born 1913 in Novonikolayevsk, now Novosibirsk, a factory worker's son. By early 1943, he had flown MiG-3s and I-16s. Good aircraft, Soviet aircraft. But when he received his first P-39 Airacobra, everything changed. His first test flight, the tricycle landing gear stable on muddy snow-covered airfields. Soviet fighters with tail wheels slipped and ground looped. The P-39 rolled straight and true. The American radio, reliable, crystal clear. At a time when only 1 in 10 Soviet aircraft had functioning communications equipment, the P-39's radio transformed tactical coordination. Every single time. The 37mm cannon. Devastating. One hit and that was usually goodbye to the enemy. The control layout logical. The visibility excellent. The roll rate superior to anything he had flown. But the American manual said to use it as a high-altitude interceptor, optimized for combat above 20,000 feet. Pokrishkin read those specifications and made a decision that would change the air war. He would ignore them. Years later, Soviet pilot Nikolai Golodnikov would explain, "If we had flown it the way the Americans outlined in the aircraft specifications, they would have shot us down immediately. This fighter was a dud in its design regimes. But we conducted normal combat in our regimes. Eastern Front combat rarely occurred above 20,000 feet. Ground attack, close air support, interceptions below 15,000 feet. At those altitudes, the P-39's roll rate of 75 degrees per second at 235 miles per hour exceeded the Zero, exceeded the F-4F, Wildcat exceeded the F-6F, Hellcat exceeded the P-38 Lightning. The Royal Air Force itself confirmed it could easily outturn a Messerschmitt B F-109. Without its turbocharger, the P-39 was perfect for the war the Soviets were actually fighting. The flaw that doomed it in the West made it ideal in the East, and Alexander Pukrishkin was about to prove it. April 29, 1943, Kuban Bridgehead, southern Russia, 0630 hours. Alexander Pukrishkin stands before 7 other pilots. 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment. The Germans are massing for a ground offensive. Luftwaffe support 3 squadrons of Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, approximately 36 aircraft, escorted by Messerschmitt B F-109Gs. Another 24 fighters, 60 German aircraft, 8 P-39 Airacobras. The odds 8 against 60, 0710 hours. Pilots run to their aircraft. Boots on concrete. Engine start sequence. Starter engagement. Wine building to roar. The Allison 51710 engine catches. 12 cylinders firing. Smooth, powerful, radio crackle. Formation, this is Stautka 100. Pukrishkin's call sign 100. Stautka, the swallow. Positions for takeoff. Multiple engines starting. The sound builds like a symphony of American power on Soviet soil. Takeoff sequence. Tricycle landing gear rolls smooth. Tail lifts. Rotation. Gear tucks into wells with solid mechanical precision. 0820 hours. 8 P-39s in formation flight. Pukrishkin's voice calm on radio. Maintain spacing. Bookshelf formation. Watch the sun. The bookshelf formation. Pukrishkin's innovation. Pairs of fighters stacked at different altitudes, all facing toward the sun. So when they attack, they come out of blinding light. 0847 hours. Stautka, this is Stautka 3. Contact, 2 o'clock, 5,000 meters. Distant formation visible. Junkers Ju-87S. Distinct gull wings. Fixed landing gear. Slow, vulnerable. Messerschmitts providing top cover above them. Pukrishkin's voice sharp, all units. Vysota skorost manover ogon. Height, speed, maneuver, fire. The dive begins. The sun at their backs. Invisible until the last moment. 600 meters. Pukrishkin squeezes the trigger. All 4 guns fire simultaneously. He had his engineers wire them together. The 37mm cannon booms. Machine guns chatter. First Ju-87 disintegrates. Wing over. Second target. 400 meters. Fire again. Second is Stuka trailing black smoke, flames erupting. German radio panicked. Achtung, Achtung, feindliche Jäger. Then the ground station broadcast that would echo through Luftwaffe squadrons. Achtung, Pukrishkin ist in der Luft. Multiple dogfights erupt. Grigory Reshkalov and Nikolai Gulayev engage the Messerschmitt escorts. The P-39's superior roll rate becomes devastatingly apparent. A Bf-109 tries to follow a snap roll, cannot match it. The German overshoots. Pukrishkin's aircraft pulls vertical. Vertical scissors, bleeding the Messerschmitt's speed. The German pilot realizes his mistake too late. Reversal. The 37mm fires. Single shot. Boom. Explosion. Wing separates. Messerschmitt tumbling. Pilot bails out, parachute blossoming white against blue sky. 0903 hours. 16 minutes elapsed. Sky clearing, German formations scattered. Bombers jettisoning loads fleeing. Fighters disengaging. Radio check. Stautka, all units, status check. Responses come in all positive. Stautka 2, no damage. Stautka 3, no damage. Through all 8 aircraft, Pukrishkin's voice steady. Return to base. Well done. Results appear in the after-action report. German losses, 12 aircraft destroyed. 5 credited to Pukrishkin, 3 to Rechkalov, 2 to Gulayev, 2 to others. Soviet losses 0. Pokrishkin would later write in his memoir, "I considered it my greatest achievement that not a single supporting aircraft was lost." The useless American fighter had just achieved a 12-0 kill ratio against the most feared air force in the world. If you served in the Air Force or Navy during the 1940s through the 1970s, you might have trained on aircraft designed during this era. The men who flew these missions: Alexander Pokrishkin, Grigory Reshkalov, Nikolai Gulayev, they were no different from the American pilots many of you knew. They faced the same fears, the same adrenaline, the same split-second decisions between life and death. Did you or someone you know ever meet a Soviet pilot after the war? During the Cold War détente in the 1970s? Did they ever mention the P-39? Leave your stories in the comments. Because what we are about to show you is why those stories were buried for so long, and why Stalin himself wrote to Franklin Roosevelt asking for more of the airplane America had thrown away. 1943. Stalin sits in his Kremlin office writing a letter to Roosevelt. Not a demand, a request. The translation reads, "The P-39 Airacobra has proven highly effective for our pilots. We respectfully request additional aircraft of this type." This is Stalin, the man who called the American M3 Grant tank a coffin for 7 brothers, who despised most Lend-Lease equipment, personally requesting more of the airplane America had rejected. By war's end, 4,773 P-39s had been delivered to the Soviet Union, the most numerous foreign fighter in the Soviet Air Force inventory. More than 1/3 of all American and British supplied fighters. And they were not just flying them, they were dominating with them. Alexander Pokrishkin 59 confirmed victories, 48 of them in P-39 Airacobras, 3-time hero of the Soviet Union, the first person to receive that honor 3 times during the war. His personal notebooks suggest his actual score exceeded 100 kills, many over enemy territory unconfirmable by Soviet standards. He invented the bookshelf formation, had engineers wire his weapons to fire simultaneously. When his call sign appeared over the battlefield, Luftwaffe ground stations broadcast warnings. Junior pilots ordered to return to base immediately. Not a suggestion, an order. Grigory Reshkalov, 50-56 victories in P-39s, the highest individual P-39 kill count. He shot down the widest variety of enemy types of any Soviet ace: Heinkel bombers, Junkers attack aircraft, Messerschmitt fighters, Focke-Wulf fighters, even an Italian Savoia flying boat. He had color blindness, which he managed to hide from military doctors his entire career. He compensated by holding the trigger longer. Nikolai Gulayev, 41 enemy aircraft destroyed in just 12 months of P-39 combat, the most efficient kill rate of any Airacobra pilot. The 9th Guards Fighter Aviation Division, Pokrishkin's unit, 1,147 total victories, 31 heroes of the Soviet Union. The 153rd Guards Fighter Regiment provides the starkest statistical evidence. First 2 months of P-39 service, 20 Airacobras, shot down 18 bombers and 45 fighters while losing only 8 aircraft. Kill ratio, approximately 8-1. 8-1 against the Luftwaffe, and America called this airplane inferior. But the P-39 had a fatal flaw. Soviet pilots discovered it in combat. When ammunition was expended returning from missions, the aircraft could enter an unrecoverable flat spin. The center of gravity shifted rearward as the ammunition bays emptied. That 37mm cannon in the nose, the machine gun ammunition combined over 500 pounds. When empty, the balance point moved too far aft. No amount of control input could recover it. If you had altitude, you could bail out. If you did not, multiple Soviet pilots died this way. Soviet engineers brought Bell aircraft representatives to witness the problem. They flew P-39s with empty ammunition, deliberately induced spins. Bell representatives watched as Soviet pilots demonstrated again and again. Bell aircraft denied the flaw existed, unable to reproduce in testing. The suggestion, Soviet pilots must be mishandling the aircraft. Soviet incompetence. The mystery went unexplained for 3 decades, 1970s. NASA's Langley Research Center, a researcher cleaning storage areas, discovers the original World War II P-39 spin tunnel model, dusty, forgotten. Label reads P-39, Airacobra spin test 1940 to 1943. Decision: rerun the tests. First, replicate the wartime configuration. Full ammunition load. Induce spin. Result recoverable. Matches? Bell's 1940s data exactly. Then a researcher asks a question: what if we test with empty ammunition? Recalculate center of gravity. Empty ammunition bays. Induce spin. The model tumbled. Unrecoverable flat spin. Exactly as Soviet pilots reported 30 years earlier. Bell aircraft had not lied about their test results. They had simply tested the wrong configuration. Every wartime test assumed full ammunition loads. The fatal characteristic only appeared with depleted ammunition. Exactly the condition combat pilots experienced returning from missions. This was a genuine failure of testing methodology that cost pilots their lives. It was discovered 3 decades too late. Bell had not lied. But pilots still died because of it. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders. The last plane shot down by the Luftwaffe, a Soviet P-39, May 9, 1945. The last Soviet air victory of World War II, Captain Vasily Pshenichnikov in a P-39, Airacobra. Focke-Wulf FW-189 over Prague. The P-39 fired the opening shots of the air war on the Eastern Front in the closing shots. America pretended it never happened. Within 5 years of Germany's surrender, the Cold War begins. Alexander Pokrishkin, three-time hero of the Soviet Union, sits at a desk in Moscow. The man who terrified the Luftwaffe now faces a different enemy: Soviet bureaucracy. He is briefly blacklisted, his crime preferring an American fighter over Soviet designs. In 1948, he is recommended for additional honors. The recommendation is denied. The reason stated in internal Communist Party documents: it would glorify foreign manufacturing. His preference for the P-39 stalls his career advancement for decades under Stalin. While other aces receive promotions, Pokrishkin waits. The aircraft that saved his life 59 times becomes a political liability. In Soviet propaganda, Lend-Lease contributions are systematically minimized. Posters glorify Yak-9s and La-5s. Soviet engineering genius. The P-39 quietly disappears from prominent displays. Pokrishkin's memoirs, when finally published or edited. References to the P-39 reduced. Passages emphasizing Soviet aircraft inserted. The censors do their work thoroughly. Across the ocean in America, a different erasure unfolds. Historians in the 1950s and 60s write the official histories. The P-39 was a failure, they conclude. British rejection confirmed it. American pilot complaints validated it. Soviet testimony dismissed. One academic paper from 1967 includes a footnote that reveals everything. It may be that because this testimony comes from the former Soviet Union, it is distrusted. Not evaluated, not investigated, simply distrusted. The Cold War erases the P-39's greatest achievements from history on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Today at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, 5 principal American fighters from World War II stand on display. The P-38 Lightning, present. The P-40 Warhawk, present. The P-47 Thunderbolt, present. The P-51 Mustang, present. The P-39 Airacobra, absent, not represented, not honored, not remembered. The P-38P, 40 P-47, and P-51 being have active pilots associations. Veterans gather, stories are shared, history is preserved. The P-39 Zero associations, no reunions, no shared memories. The only one of America's 5 principal fighters excluded from institutional memory. Colonel Evans G. Stevens, who flew P-39s in combat, would later say, "We didn't really know it was an unpopular airplane. We didn't have any chance to think about that. We were too busy flying and fighting." Lieutenant Colonel William A. Shomo, an American ace, testified, "Nothing could touch a P-39 below 15,000 feet. I would have taken on the vaunted P-38 at lower altitudes." Their testimony, like the Soviet pilots before them, was ignored. The aircraft simply erased from collective memory. But the question remains, why such thorough erasure? Why not simply acknowledge it as a specialized aircraft that found its niche? The answer takes us back to December 1946. Oliver P. Eccles retires from the United States Army Air Forces with full honors. 40 years of service. billions of dollars in procurement decisions behind him. Within weeks, he accepts a new position. President of the Aircraft Industries Association, the AIA represents every major aircraft manufacturer. Lockheed, North American, Boeing, Douglas, Republic, Grumman, Consolidated, the entire industry. Bell Aircraft, not a major member, too small to matter. Think about this carefully. The man who controlled $43.5 billion in wartime contracts, who decided which companies received orders, which designs were purchased, which fighters equipped American squadrons, now leads the organization lobbying on behalf of those same companies. No cooling off period, no ethics investigation, no public outcry. In 1946, this revolving door spins freely and legally. Let us review his wartime decisions with this context in mind. The P-39, rejected for frontline USAF service, despite being sent to allies. Built by Bell Aircraft, a small outsider company with no representation in the AIA's inner circle. The P-51 Mustang, initially rejected by Eccles until Hap Arnold personally intervened. Built by North American Aviation, whose president was Arnold's personal friend from World War I. Later became a centerpiece of AIO promotional materials. The Fisher P-75, heavily promoted by Eccles, a complete failure that never entered service. But contracts were issued, money was spent, and the companies involved were all AIA members. Howard Hughes, personally blocked from contracts for years after a perceived slight. Hughes was an independent operator outside the club. The pattern is unmistakable. After the war, the AIA commissions official aviation histories, respected authors, academic credentials, seemingly objective analysis. The P-39 is portrayed as a failure across the board. Soviet success attributed to different tactical conditions. Primitive opposition inflated claims. Anything except the possibility that the aircraft was fundamentally sound. Soviet testimony is not merely questioned. It is systematically dismissed as propaganda, as unreliable as the exaggerations of a closed society. The narrative becomes locked. The P-39 failed. Period. Oliver Eccles' version of history becomes the official version, and it remains unchallenged for 7 decades. But in that carefully constructed narrative, there are gaps, stories that fell through the cracks, pilots who deserved to be remembered but were not. June 2015, Thunder Bay, Michigan. Wayne Lusardi pilots a research vessel across Lake Huron. He is Michigan's state maritime archaeologist, mapping World War II training crash sites in Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. The sonar pings rhythmically. Then an anomaly appears on the screen, 200 feet down, distinct shape, aircraft wreckage. The team prepares for a dive. Underwater footage reveals distinguishing features emerging from the murk. Tricycle landing gear, inline engine, the unmistakable profile of a Bell P-39 Era Cobra. Research into flight records begins immediately. Cross-referencing dates units missing aircraft reports. April 11, 1944. A training mission from Selfridge Field. Gunnery exercise over Lake Huron. Second Lieutenant Frank H. Moody. Tuskegee Airmen, 332nd Fighter Group. Age 23. The crash report is brief. Aircraft lost control during gunnery pass. Went into the water. Body never recovered. Frank Moody's service photograph shows a young man in dress uniform. Handsome, proud. The Tuskegee Airman wings on his chest represent a journey of extraordinary determination. He had overcome systemic racism to earn those wings. Trained at a segregated facility in Alabama, where black pilots proved themselves despite an institution designed to exclude them. Earned the right to fly fighters in defense of a country that denied him basic civil rights. And he died in a training accident flying an airplane America called worthless. His body remains in the lake to this day. The family held a funeral with an empty casket. The military marked him killed in action training. Life moved on. For 71 years, Frank Moody rested 200 feet below the surface of Lake Huron. Forgotten, until Wayne Lusardi's sonar found him. In 2023, NOAA partners with the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum for a recovery operation. Not of the body too disturbed by 7 decades of current and cold, but of artifacts, pieces of history. The instrument panel corroded but recognizable. The control stick frozen in position. Personal effects handled with reverence and then sealed for the family's privacy. A marginalized pilot, a marginalized aircraft. Both forgotten by official history, both now remembered. At the Tuskegee Airmen National Museum today, Frank Moody's story is told, his photograph displayed, his sacrifice honored. Visitors, many of them school children, learn that he died delivering an airplane America rejected. The parallels inescapable. The P-39 excluded from the Air Force Academy Memorial. Frank Moody excluded from recognition for decades. Both casualties of institutional bias that extended far beyond technical specifications. November 13, 1985. Moscow, Alexander Ivanovich Pukrishkin dies at age 72. Marshal of Aviation, a rank he finally achieved in 1972 after decades of waiting. His funeral received state honors. Red Square, military ceremony. The medals are displayed: 3 gold stars, Hero of the Soviet Union, Orders of Lenin, Orders of the Red Banner, a career of service spanning 4 decades. But careful observers notice what is absent. No P-39 era Cobra model on display. Soviet protocol cannot prominently feature foreign equipment, even at the funeral of the man who flew it to legendary status. Even in death, the aircraft is erased from his story. 1 year before he died, in his final interview, Pukrishkin spoke with unusual candor. The interviewer, a young Russian journalist, asked the standard question, "Which Soviet fighter was your favorite?" Pukrishkin smiled. The same question, always. And always they wanted the same answer. "People ask me this," he said, his voice still strong despite age. "They want me to say Yak-9 or La-5, the patriotic answer." He paused, looked directly at the camera. "But I am an old man now. I can tell the truth. My era Cobra, she was beautiful, reliable, deadly. She never betrayed me. I owe her my life many times." His voice caught slightly. "I wish I could tell her thank you." The interview was never broadcast on Soviet television, too politically sensitive, but a transcript survived in the journalist's personal files. Years later, after the Soviet Union collapsed, it would be published. Pukrishkin's personal notebooks discovered after his death reveal even more. Detailed records of every mission. Over 100 victories tallied in his own handwriting, many over German territory unconfirmable by Soviet standards and thus never added to his official score. 59 confirmed victories. But the notebooks tell a different story. Each tally mark represents a moment when the P-39 brought him home alive. At his funeral, veterans who served with him gathered quietly afterward. They spoke in low voices about the era Cobra, how it saved them, how it performed beyond anything they expected, how they knew, even as Soviet propaganda minimized it, that the American fighter had been extraordinary. But these conversations happened in private, never officially recorded, another layer of history buried. Then in the 2010s, something begins to change. The Soviet Union has collapsed. Archives open, documents that were classified for 50 years become available to researchers. Russian historians, free from ideological constraints, begin publishing primary sources. American documents are declassified. 75 years have passed. The Freedom of Information Act forces release of procurement records, internal assessments, communications between officials. A new generation of historians with access to both Soviet and American sources begins asking different questions. In 2012, the Journal of Military History publishes the Bell P-39 Era Cobra, a reassessment. The paper systematically compares Soviet combat results with American testing data. The conclusion challenges 70 years of conventional wisdom. In 2017, Soviet tactical innovation in Lend-Lease fighters appears in air power history. It documents how Soviet pilots adapted American aircraft to Eastern Front conditions, achieving results the original designers never imagined. In 2021, a damning paper titled Institutional Bias in USAAF Procurement, 1940 to 1945, traces the revolving door between military procurement and industry lobbying. Oliver Eccles features prominently. Academic conferences begin featuring panels on the P-39. Respected historians present evidence. The consensus slowly shifts. Meanwhile, aviation enthusiasts have been restoring P-39s to flying condition. Warbird collectors, using original blueprints and parts scavenged from around the world, bring these fighters back to life. At air shows, modern pilots fly them. and their assessments recorded on camera are remarkable. Below 15,000 feet, this airplane is incredible. One experienced warbird pilot says after landing a restored P-39, "The roll rate is exceptional, the visibility is outstanding. The handling is honest and predictable. I would absolutely have taken this into combat at low altitude." 75 years after Soviet pilots said the same thing, American pilots are finally confirming it. In November 2020, in Novosibirsk, Russia, a statue is unveiled. Alexander Pokrishkin stands in bronze flight suit and cap gazing toward the sky. And beside him in equally careful detail stands a P-39 Airacobra. The inscription reads in Russian, then English, "Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times." The aircraft is finally honored alongside the pilot. Russian school children visit. They learn about Pokrishkin. They learn about the American fighter he loved. The full story at last. In 2025, the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio opens a new exhibit, the P-39 Airacobra Redemption of a Fighter. A restored P-39 sits under lights. Information panels tell the complete story: the troubled development, the British rejection, the Soviet success, the statistical evidence, the Cold War erasure, the modern reassessment. Frank Moody's photograph is displayed prominently, his story told in full. A separate panel explains the Tuskegee Airmen and the additional burden of racism they carried while serving. Video screens show interviews with the few surviving Soviet veterans who flew P-39s. Their testimony, dismissed for decades, finally presented as credible historical evidence. Families visit, veterans visit, school children on field trips stop and read. An elderly man, 97 years old, approaches the exhibit slowly. He stares at the P-39 for a long time. A museum volunteer asks if he is okay. "I flew one," he says quietly. 44, New Guinea, ground attack missions. The volunteer trained to collect such stories pulls out a recorder. "Would you be willing to share your experience?" The veteran talks for 20 minutes. How the P-39 performed beautifully at low altitude. How the 37mm cannon was devastating against ground targets. How his unit achieved their objectives with minimal losses. "I never knew it was supposed to be a bad airplane," he says at the end. "It brought me home every time." The volunteer thanks him, saves the recording. Another piece of buried history recovered. The P-39 Airacobra was not a perfect fighter. Its turbocharger installation was genuinely problematic. Its high-altitude performance was genuinely poor. The flat spin issue with empty ammunition was a real and fatal flaw. But the evidence, when examined honestly, overwhelmingly, suggests its reputation was shaped less by objective assessment than by institutional bias, political convenience, financial desperation, propaganda from a journalist with fascist sympathies, Cold War erasure of Soviet testimony, and an establishment that found it useful to call the plane inferior while shipping thousands to an ally who used them to devastating effect. The P-39's real crime was not poor performance. It was being built by the wrong company, championed by advocates who were absent or conflicted, and judged by metrics designed for a war it was never meant to fight. 7,170 Cobra family aircraft sent to the Soviet Union, the largest export of any American fighter family to any single nation in World War II. If the aircraft were truly worthless, this would represent one of the greatest wastes of resources in military history. But they were not wasted. They were used brilliantly by pilots who understood them. Alexander Pokrishkin became Marshal of Aviation. He lived until 1985. He never stopped preferring the P-39 to any Soviet fighter he flew. When he died, his medals filled a display case. 3 gold stars of Hero of the Soviet Union, all earned in an American airplane his own country tried to minimize. For those of you watching who served in the military, who worked in defense industries, who remember the Cold War and the certainties it demanded, this story offers a different lesson. The truth is rarely as simple as official narratives suggest. Institutional interests shape history as surely as events do. And sometimes the most important stories are the ones that powerful people would prefer to forget. If this story moved you, if you believe that forgotten history deserves to be told, leave a comment below sharing your own memories or family stories from this era. The P-39 deserved better. Frank Moody deserved better. The 38 women Air Force service pilots who died delivering these aircraft deserve better. The Soviet pilots whose testimony was dismissed for generations deserve better. And now you know their stories. Now you know the truth. The fighter they tried to forget has finally been remembered.